Homeless woman plays guitar and little boy stops to listen. She is shocked when he revealed his name. The rain fell in steady sheets, turning the city streets into mirrors that reflected the neon signs and streetlights in fractured patterns. Elena's fingers were stiff with cold as they moved across the steel strings of her weathered guitar, but she didn't stop playing. She couldn't stop. The music was all she had left. A decade ago, these same hands had graced the stages of prestigious concert halls, drawing standing ovations from audiences who believed they were witnessing the rise of a new star. Now they played for loose change thrown into a battered guitar case, the velvet interior long since worn threadbare, much like Elena's dreams. She was stationed at her usual corner, beneath the overhang of an abandoned department store. The location offered some shelter from the rain and decent acoustics, transforming the empty street into her makeshift concert hall. The song she played was one of her own compositions, one of many that had been stolen from her. She called it Moonlight's Lament, though it now went by a different name, one she refused to acknowledge. Through the curtain of rain, a small figure appeared. Elena almost missed him at first, this little boy in a bright yellow raincoat who stopped to listen, his wide eyes fixed on her hands as they danced across the fretboard. He couldn't have been more than 8 or 9, with a mop of dark curls peeking out from under his hood and rain boots that seemed too big for his feet. Elena's first instinct was to stop playing. Children alone on the street usually meant worried parents would soon appear, often with accusations or suspicious glares directed at the homeless woman near their child. But something in the boy's expression made her continue. He stood perfectly still, swaying slightly to the melody, his face showing the kind of pure appreciation that only children could manage. As the last notes faded into the wet air, the boy broke into enthusiastic applause, the sound muffled by his rain-soaked mittens. "That was amazing!" he exclaimed, bouncing on his heels. "Can you play it again? Please?" Elena found herself smiling despite the cold that had settled into her bones. "Shouldn't you be heading home? It's getting dark. My dad's just in that building." The boy pointed to a modern office complex across the street. "He has a meeting. I'm supposed to wait in the lobby, but I heard your music." He stepped closer, seemingly unafraid of the shabby woman before him. "I'm Daniel. Daniel Whitmore." "Nice to meet you, Daniel," Elena replied, her hands automatically moving to play another song, something cheerful to match his energy. But his words echoed in her mind, Daniel Whitmore. "Could it be this song you played?" Daniel continued, pulling out a smartphone that cost more than everything Elena owned combined. "My dad plays it at home all the time. He says it's his most special composition." Elena's fingers slipped, producing a discordant twang that made them both wince. "Your dad plays this song?" "Yeah. He's a musician. Well, he used to perform more, but now he mostly produces and writes music for other people. He says this song was inspired by moonlight, but I think that's kind of silly. How can moonlight make music?" The world seemed to tilt beneath Elena's feet. She gripped her guitar tighter, using it as an anchor to reality as memories crashed over her like waves. Late nights in the recording studio, Benjamin Whitmore nodding approvingly as she played this very song for the first time, his promises of making her a star, the contract that would have stripped her of all rights to her music, her refusal, and then. "Your father." Elena managed to keep her voice steady, though her heart was racing. "Is Benjamin Whitmore?" Daniel beamed with pride. "You know him? He's super famous in the music industry. Though he says his best songs were from years ago, before I was born. He tells everyone that his greatest inspiration was this singer who disappeared. He gets really sad when he talks about her." A bitter laugh threatened to escape Elena's throat. Disappeared. Is that what Benjamin called it? Is that how he justified stealing her music, her dreams, her entire life? "Daniel!" A sharp voice cut through the rain. A woman in an expensive coat was hurrying across the street, her high heels clicking against the wet pavement. "What are you doing out here? Your father's meeting is over. We've been looking everywhere for you." "Sorry, Mom. I was just listening to music. This lady plays Dad's song better than anyone." The woman, Mrs. Whitmore, Elena presumed, barely glanced in her direction. "Come along, Daniel. Your father's waiting in the car." She grabbed Daniel's hand, already pulling him away. "Wait," Daniel called out, resisting slightly. "Can I record you playing? I want to show Dad." Before his mother could protest, Daniel had already pressed record on his phone. Elena looked directly into the camera lens and began to play Moonlight's Lament one more time. But this time, she played it exactly as she had that first night in the studio, with all the subtle nuances and personal flourishes that she had never taught anyone, not even Benjamin. Flourishes that proved this song was hers. "Daniel, that's enough!" His mother tugged him away more insistently. "I'll show Dad," Daniel called back as he was led away. "He'll love it." Elena watched them disappear into a sleek black car, her hands still moving across the strings, playing the song that had once been her ticket to stardom. Now, through a twist of fate and the innocence of a child, it might become her key to justice. The rain continued to fall, but Elena barely noticed it anymore. For the first time in years, she felt a spark of something dangerous: hope. Benjamin Whitmore thought she was gone, perhaps even dead. He had no idea that his own son had just handed her the power to shatter the carefully constructed lies he'd built his career upon. She packed up her guitar, counting the meager earnings of the day. Tomorrow, she would return to this corner. And she would wait for Daniel Whitmore to return with news of his father's reaction to the video. After all, ghosts had a way of haunting those who thought they buried them. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. The shelter's thin mattress offered little comfort as memories she'd spent years suppressing came rushing back, sharp and vivid as broken glass. She remembered everything about that night 10 years ago, the night Benjamin Whitmore had shown his true colors. The recording studio had been her second home for months. Benjamin had discovered her playing at a small cafe, recognized her talent, and promised to make her a star. He'd seemed so genuine then, with his salt and pepper hair and fatherly smile, telling her she reminded him of his younger self, hungry for success but unwilling to compromise her artistic integrity. Elena pulled her threadbare blanket tighter, trying to ward off the chill that came with these memories. She could still hear his voice. "Elena, darling, this contract is standard in the industry. Sign it, and we'll release your album next month. You'll be touring by summer." But Elena hadn't been born yesterday. She'd spent 3 days reviewing that contract with a friend in law school, and what they found made her blood run cold. Hidden in the legal jargon was a complete surrender of her rights, not just to future songs, but to every piece she'd ever written. Benjamin would own everything, could change her music however he wanted, could even prevent her from performing her own songs. "I won't sign away my soul," she told him that night in the studio. "These songs are part of who I am. We can negotiate something fair." His fatherly mask had slipped then, revealing something cold and calculating beneath. "Fair? I've invested thousands in you, Elena. I've given you studio time, coaching, connections. And now you want to dictate terms to me? My music is not for sale." She'd stood her ground. "Not like this." His laugh still haunted her. "Your music? Oh, Elena. You really should have read the fine print on those studio contracts you've been signing. Every recording session, every demo, you've already given me permission to use them." She'd left that night, thinking she could fight him legally. But Benjamin had been methodical. Those seemingly innocent studio documents had indeed contained carefully worded clauses. While they wouldn't have held up to a prolonged legal battle, Elena couldn't afford one. Benjamin could. Within months, her songs began appearing on other artists' albums, credited to Benjamin Whitmore. Moonlight's Lament became his breakthrough hit as a songwriter. When Elena tried to protest, his lawyers descended with cease and desist letters and threats of lawsuits that would bankrupt her family. The final blow came when he spread rumors in the industry that she was unstable, difficult to work with, prone to substance abuse. Venues canceled her bookings. Studios wouldn't touch her. Her reputation was destroyed before her career could even begin. Elena sat up in her shelter bed, her hands instinctively moving to form chord shapes in the darkness. The shelter's strict rules meant she couldn't keep her guitar with her at night. It was safely stored in a locker near the front desk. Sometimes, like tonight, her fingers ached with phantom melodies, songs still unwritten that had nowhere to go. But now, after all these years, fate had dealt her an unexpected card: Daniel Whitmore. Benjamin's own son, innocently captivated by the very music his father had stolen. The irony was almost too perfect. Elena reached under her pillow and pulled out her most treasured possession, a small notebook, its pages crinkled from years of being carried everywhere. Inside were her original compositions, dated and annotated, complete with early drafts and revisions. She tried showing these to lawyers years ago, but without money for legal fees, they were just paper and ink. But now, the sound of Daniel's voice played in her mind. Dad gets really sad when he talks about her. Was it possible that Benjamin actually felt guilty? That somewhere beneath his polished exterior, the weight of what he'd done still haunted him? Elena flipped through the notebook until she found Moonlight's Lament. The margins were filled with personal notes about what had inspired each verse, each chord progression. Things only the true composer would know. Things she could prove, if given the chance. But did she want to? The question gnawed at her as dawn approached. Daniel's innocent admiration for his father complicated everything. She knew what it was like to have your world shattered. Did she really want to do that to a child? Then again, wasn't Benjamin already failing his son by building his legacy on lies? Maybe the truth would hurt Daniel now, but finding out later would be even worse. And there was something else, something Elena had noticed in their brief interaction. Daniel had a genuine love for music. The way his eyes had lit up when she played, the pure joy in his applause, that was real. As the first gray light of morning filtered through the shelter's windows, Elena made her decision. She would return to her corner and wait for Daniel. But this time, she would bring her notebook. If he came back, she would teach him more than just a melody. She would teach him about the heart and soul that went into creating it. And if Benjamin heard about it, well, that was a bonus. Elena closed the notebook and tucked it safely away. In a few hours, she would retrieve her guitar and head back to her spot on the street. But first, she pulled out a pen and began writing something new in her notebook. If she was going to confront her past, she needed a new song, something that captured both the pain of betrayal and the possibility of redemption. She titled it, The Ghost's Reply. For 3 days, Elena returned to her corner, each morning telling herself this would be the last. The spring rain had given way to unexpected heat, making the city air thick and oppressive. She played through her usual repertoire, but her eyes constantly scanned the street for a yellow raincoat that never appeared. On the 4th day, she almost didn't go. The shelter's social worker had told her about a possible job opportunity, dishwashing at a restaurant across town. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady work, a chance to save money, maybe even rent a room eventually. A step toward rebuilding her life. But something drew her back to that corner. She arrived later than usual, the afternoon sun already casting long shadows between the buildings. Her guitar case lay open at her feet, containing more than just loose change today. She'd placed her notebook there too, its pages weighted down by a few coins. She was halfway through an old folk song when she heard it, the rapid padding of small feet on pavement. "You're still here!" Daniel's voice cut through the city noise. He was wearing a school uniform now, his backpack bouncing as he ran toward her. A different woman, presumably a nanny, hurried after him, looking concerned but not stopping him. Elena's fingers stilled on the strings. "Daniel, I was beginning to think you'd forgotten about me." "Never!" His face was flushed with excitement. "I've been begging to come back, but Mom and Dad were too busy. But look," he pulled out his phone, the same video from days ago queued up. "Dad saw it. You should have seen his face." Elena's heart quickened. "What do you mean?" "We were having dinner, and I showed him. He got really quiet, like when I'm in trouble, but he wasn't mad. His hands were shaking. He spilled his wine all over the table, but he didn't even notice. He kept asking me where I found you, what you looked like, if you said anything about Daniel paused, scrunching his face in concentration. About attribution? I think that's the word he used. The nanny had caught up now, hovering uncertainly nearby. Elena nodded to her reassuringly before turning back to Daniel. What did you tell him? Just that you were really good at playing his song. But then something weird happened. Daniel lowered his voice conspiratorially. Dad said you couldn't possibly be playing it right, that no one knew the original arrangement. But in the video, you did this thing with your fingers. He tried to demonstrate, his small hands making vague guitar-playing motions. And Dad got really pale. He said it was impossible because only the person who wrote it would know that part. Elena's hand instinctively went to her notebook. Did he say anything else about the original composer? Daniel's expression clouded. That's the really weird part. Mom got mad when I asked. She said something about not bringing up ghosts from the past and sent me to my room. But I could hear them arguing. Dad kept saying it can't be her over and over. A chill ran through Elena despite the heat. Benjamin thought she was finished. He'd probably convinced himself of it to ease his conscience. Now that illusion was cracking. But you know what's even stranger? Daniel continued, oblivious to her tension. The next morning, I found Dad in his studio. He was playing all his old songs, but they sounded different. Sadder. And he was looking through these really old papers and photos. I saw him crying, but he didn't know I was there. The nanny checked her watch. Daniel, we need to go. Your tennis lesson. Wait. Daniel turned to Elena, his eyes bright with an idea. You should come to our house. Dad needs to meet you. He needs to know you can play his songs the right way. Elena's mouth went dry. Daniel, I don't think. Please? Our house has a huge music room with lots of guitars. Better than playing on the street. And Dad's having a party this weekend. Lots of important music people will be there. You could play for everyone. The nanny stepped forward. Daniel, we can't invite strangers to your father's event. Your parents would. But she's not a stranger. She knows Dad's music better than anyone. Better than Dad, even. He turned back to Elena, his voice dropping to a whisper. I think Dad needs to see you. He's been different since I showed him the video. Like he's scared of something. Elena looked at this child, this innocent boy who had unknowingly set in motion events that could destroy his father's carefully constructed world. She should say no. Should take that dishwashing job, move across town, forget about revenge and justice and all the bitter pills she'd swallowed over the years. But then she thought about Benjamin crying in his studio, playing her songs, their true versions, not the commercialized ones he'd released. Was it guilt? Regret? Or just fear that his sins were finally catching up to him? The party, she heard herself say. When is it? Saturday night. 7 o'clock. We live in the big house on Maple Grove, the one with the iron gates. You can't miss it. Daniel was practically bouncing with excitement. Daniel, we really must go. The nanny insisted, finally taking his arm. Promise you'll come? Daniel called as he was led away. Promise you'll play for Dad? Elena raised her hand in a wave, not quite a promise, but enough to make Daniel beam as he disappeared around the corner. Once he was gone, she opened her notebook to The Ghost's Reply. Below the title, she wrote a new line. Saturday, 7 p.m. Maple Grove. She had 3 days to decide whether she was ready to step out of the shadows and confront the man who had stolen her life. 3 days to determine if revenge was worth the cost of shattering a child's faith in his father. Or perhaps there was another way. A path that led neither to revenge nor surrender, but to something else entirely. Something even Benjamin Whitmore wasn't expecting. Saturday evening arrived with an unseasonable chill. Elena stood before the wrought iron gates of the Whitmore estate, clutching her guitar case with white-knuckled fingers. She had spent her last few dollars on a second-hand dress from the thrift store, simple black, modest enough to pass for cocktail attire in dim lighting. Her hair, freshly washed in the shelter's communal bathroom, was pulled back in a neat bun. She looked presentable. Almost like her old self, before life on the streets had worn her down. The gates were open, allowing expensive cars to glide up the circular driveway. Elena emerged with a group of well-dressed guests, trying to ignore their curious glances at her guitar case. Music drifted from the mansion's open windows, a string quartet playing in the foyer. Even from outside, she could tell the acoustics were perfect. "You came!" Daniel's voice made her jump. He had somehow slipped away from the party, and was now running down the driveway toward her, dressed in a miniature tuxedo that made him look even younger. "I've been watching for you all night." "Daniel, I'm not sure this is a good idea." "It is. Come on, I'll show you the music room. Dad's busy with his guests, but he always goes there later to play something. That's when you can surprise him." Before Elena could protest, Daniel had grabbed her hand and was pulling her toward a side entrance. They slipped into the house through what appeared to be a service door, emerging into a hallway lined with gold-framed photographs. Elena's breath caught as she recognized some of them, younger versions of Benjamin, accepting awards, posing with famous musicians. All achievements built on stolen dreams. The music room, when they reached it, was larger than Elena's entire apartment from her pre-homeless days. Instruments lined the walls, guitars, pianos, even a harp catching the light from crystal chandeliers. But what made Elena stop dead in her tracks was the far wall, a display case containing familiar pieces of paper and protective frames. "Those are Dad's original manuscripts," Daniel said proudly. "From his most famous songs." Elena moved closer, her hands shaking. There, behind glass, were her songs, her handwriting, her notes, but with Benjamin's name signed at the bottom. He hadn't even bothered to recopy them. He just erased her signature and added his own. "Daniel!" Mrs. Whitmore's sharp voice cut through the room. "What are you doing here? And who?" She stopped as Elena turned around, recognition slowly dawning on her face. "Security! We have an intruder!" "No, Mom! She's the lady who plays Dad's songs. I invited her." "Daniel, go to your room. Now." Mrs. Whitmore's voice was steel. "As for you," she turned to Elena, "I don't know what kind of scam you're trying to pull, but... Catherine? What's going on?" Benjamin Whitmore stood in the doorway, a glass of champagne in his hand. 10 years had added more gray to his hair, more lines around his eyes, but his presence still filled the room. He froze when he saw Elena, the champagne glass slipping from his fingers and shattering on the hardwood floor. "Hello, Benjamin," Elena said quietly. "Long time no see." "Elena." Her name came out as barely a whisper. You're alive? Disappointed?" Daniel, who had not left as ordered, looked between them with growing confusion. "Dad? You know her?" Benjamin seemed to age a decade in those few seconds. "Daniel, go with your mother." "But..." "Now, Daniel!" But Daniel stood his ground, showing a stubbornness Elena recognized from her own youth. "Not until you explain why you look so scared. She just plays music, your music. Right?" A bitter laugh escaped Elena's throat. "Is that what you told everyone, Benjamin? That these were your songs? Did you ever mention the young songwriter you discovered? The one whose work you stole when she wouldn't sign away her rights?" "Elena, please." Benjamin stepped forward, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "There are important people here tonight. We can discuss this privately. Like we discussed it 10 years ago? When you sent lawyers to threaten my family? When you spread rumors that destroyed my career?" Mrs. Whitmore moved to the door, probably to call security again, but Daniel's voice stopped everyone. "Dad? Is it true?" The question hung in the air like smoke, impossible to wave away. Benjamin looked at his son, then at Elena, then at the framed manuscripts on the wall. The perfect life he built was balanced on a knife's edge. "I can explain," he started. "Then explain," Elena cut in, pulling out her notebook. "Explain why I have earlier versions of every song on that wall. Explain why I know variations of Moonlight's Lament that you never published. Explain why." "Because I was afraid," Benjamin's shout echoed off the high ceiling. You were young, brilliant, raw. Everything I used to be. But you wouldn't compromise, wouldn't play the game. I saw all that talent going to waste and I convinced myself I was saving your music. That I could do what you couldn't. By destroying me? I never meant. He ran a hand through his gray hair. When you disappeared, I thought. I tried to find you. But it was like you'd vanished. Eventually, I told myself you must have died. It was easier than facing what I'd done. Daniel had moved closer to the manuscript wall, his small face intense with concentration. The handwriting, he said suddenly. It's different at the bottom. Where your name is, Dad? Elena saw the exact moment Benjamin's facade cracked. His shoulders slumped, the polished veneer of success falling away to reveal a tired, guilt-ridden man. Daniel, he said softly, there are things about your father you don't know. Things I'm not proud of. Then make them right. Daniel replied with a child's simple logic. Mom always says when we do something wrong, we have to try to fix it. A sound of breaking glass from the hallway made them all turn. A group of party guests stood in the doorway, drawn by the raised voices. Among them, Elena recognized several prominent music industry executives, people whose opinion could make or break Benjamin's current position in the industry. Benjamin looked at them, then at his son's questioning face, then finally at Elena. She saw the moment he made his decision. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice carrying the smooth authority of years in the spotlight. I'm afraid I need to make an announcement. One that's long overdue. But before he could continue, Elena did something that surprised everyone, including herself. She opened her guitar case. The room fell silent as Elena withdrew her guitar. It looked shabby against the gleaming instruments that adorned the walls of Benjamin's music room, but its worn surface told a story, years of street performances, of survival, of music that refused to die. Mr. Whitmore, one of the executives spoke up. What's going on here? Who is this woman? Benjamin opened his mouth to respond, but Elena had already begun to play. Not Moonlight's Lament, as everyone might have expected, but something new. The opening notes of The Ghost's Reply filled the room, its melody hauntingly familiar yet distinctly different from anything Benjamin had ever released. The song spoke of betrayal, of years lost in darkness, of anger that burned like a forge, but also of the possibility of redemption, of the power of truth to heal old wounds. Elena had written it over the past few days, pouring into it not just her pain, but her understanding of what real justice might look like. As she played, she watched Benjamin's face. The color had drained from it entirely, and his hands, those hands that had played her stolen songs for years, were trembling. He recognized the musical themes she'd woven in, fragments of her old compositions twisted into something new and undeniably hers. When the last note faded, the silence was absolute. Then Daniel, who had been watching with wide eyes, broke into applause. That was amazing! Dad, did you hear how she used parts of your songs but made them different? Can you teach me to do that? They weren't my songs, Daniel. Benjamin's voice was rough. He cleared his throat and addressed the room of industry executives, his colleagues, his friends. They were never my songs. Mrs. Whitmore stepped forward. Benjamin, think about what you're saying. No, Catherine. I've done enough thinking. Enough justifying. He turned to face Elena. You could destroy me right now. You have every right to. The evidence in your notebook, the original manuscripts, your performance just now, any court would see the truth. I'd lose everything. My reputation, my publishing company, probably my freedom. Elena held his gaze. Is that what you think I came here for? Revenge? Didn't you? She looked around the opulent room, at the faces watching this drama unfold. The executives who could ruin Benjamin with a phone call. The wife who was seeing a side of her husband she'd never known existed. And Daniel, this bright, innocent child who loved music as purely as she once had. I thought I did, she admitted. For years, I dreamed of this moment. Of watching you lose everything, just like I did. But then I met Daniel, and I realized something. Revenge wouldn't give me back my music. It wouldn't undo the past decade. It would just create more pain, more loss. She set her guitar down and pulled out her notebook. So here's what's going to happen, Benjamin. You're going to make this right, but not by destroying yourself. We're going to find a way to tell the truth that doesn't ruin lives. One of the executives, a woman Elena recognized as the head of a major record label, stepped forward. Perhaps someone could explain what's happening here. Benjamin looked at Elena, then at his son, and something seemed to straighten in his spine. Elena Martinez was a brilliant young songwriter I discovered 10 years ago. These songs, the ones that launched my career as a composer, they were hers. I stole them. When she refused to sign an exploitative contract, I used legal loopholes to take her work. Then I buried her so deep she couldn't fight back. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The executive raised an eyebrow. That's a serious admission, Benjamin. Yes, it is. He turned to Elena. What do you want? Name your price. Anything. I don't want your money, Elena replied. I want my name back. I want the truth acknowledged. And I want to make music again, not in spite of what happened, but because of it. Daniel, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. Dad, remember what you always tell me about music? That it's not just about the notes, but about what's in your heart when you play them? Benjamin looked at his son, and something seemed to crack in his carefully maintained facade. Yes, I remember. Then maybe. Daniel looked between his father and Elena. Maybe you could both play? Together? Like how Elena just did, taking pieces of old songs and making something new? The suggestion, coming from this child who saw music not as a business but as pure creation, hit everyone with unexpected force. Elena found herself looking at her guitar, then at Benjamin's wall of instruments, seeing not the symbols of her pain but the potential for something new. The record executive was watching this exchange with growing interest. A collaboration? That could be interesting. A story of reconciliation, of music transcending past wrongs. The press would eat it up. No, Elena said firmly, making everyone look at her. Not a PR stunt. Not another manipulation. If we do this, it has to be real. Benjamin has to publicly acknowledge what happened, make proper restitution. And then only if he's genuinely willing to use his platform to help prevent what happened to me from happening to others. She paused, looking directly at him. Then maybe we can talk about making music together. About taking these broken pieces and building something new. Not for the publicity, not for the money, but for the music itself. And for Daniel, who deserves to see that it's never too late to make things right. Benjamin walked to the wall of manuscripts, his steps heavy with the weight of a decade's worth of guilt. He reached up and took down the framed original of Moonlight's Lament, looking at it as if seeing it for the first time. All these years, he said quietly, I've been playing these songs, but they never sounded quite right. Because they weren't mine to play. They were always yours, Elena. And it's time the world knew that. 3 months later, the same music room was filled with a different kind of energy. Camera crews adjusted their equipment, while reporters from major music publications found their places. The room had been transformed, the display of manuscripts replaced by a simple stage area where 2 chairs sat, 2 guitars waiting. Elena stood in what was now her private dressing room, formerly a guest bedroom in the Whitmore mansion. The past months had been a whirlwind of legal meetings, press conferences, and intense private conversations. Benjamin had kept his word, not just acknowledging the truth but working tirelessly to make amends. The formal announcement had made headlines. Renowned composer Benjamin Whitmore reveals past theft, launches rehabilitation program for defrauded artists. The industry had been shocked, but Benjamin's willingness to face the consequences head-on had turned what could have been a career-ending scandal into something unexpected, a story of redemption. 5 minutes, Ms. Martinez? A production assistant called through the door. Elena smoothed down her new dress, not secondhand this time, but chosen with care for this special event. Her reflection showed a woman transformed, not just by better circumstances, but by the weight lifted from her shoulders. The bitterness that had been her companion for so long had begun to fade, replaced by something more complex, not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. A knock at the door revealed Daniel, practically bouncing with excitement. "Elena! Dad's already downstairs. He's super nervous. I've never seen him like this before." She smiled at the boy who had unknowingly changed everything. Over the past months, as she and Benjamin had worked to untangle their complicated past, Daniel had become her most enthusiastic supporter. She'd been giving him guitar lessons, watching with joy as he approached music with the same pure love she'd once had. "Ready for your big moment?" she asked him. "Are you kidding? I've been practicing for weeks." Together, they made their way downstairs. The music room was now packed with industry figures, journalists, and selected guests. But this time, Elena wasn't an intruder, she was the star of the show. Benjamin stood as she entered, and their eyes met in a moment of shared understanding. This wasn't just a performance. It was a declaration of truth, a new beginning. The label executive who had witnessed their confrontation 3 months ago stepped up to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this very special event. Tonight marks not just the launch of Elena Martinez's comeback album, but a unique collaboration that proves music has the power to heal even the deepest wounds." Elena took her seat beside Benjamin, picking up her guitar, a new one, professionally made, though she kept her old one at home as a reminder of where she'd been. Benjamin had his own guitar, and between them sat Daniel with a smaller instrument. "Before we begin," Benjamin spoke into his microphone, his voice carrying the weight of emotion, "I want to say something. 10 years ago, I made choices that nearly destroyed a remarkable talent. I convinced myself I was preserving music, when in fact I was stealing someone's soul. The songs you've known as mine were born from Elena's heart, her experiences, her genius. Today, we're not just correcting a wrong, we're creating something new from the ashes of that mistake." Elena leaned into her microphone. "The album we're previewing tonight is called Ghosts and Gardens. Every track is a collaboration, Benjamin and I taking the songs of the past and transforming them into something new, something that speaks to both pain and healing. And for our first performance, we have a very special guest artist." Daniel beamed as she gestured to him. The cameras clicked rapidly as Benjamin's son took his position between them. "This song is called The Ghost's Reply," Elena announced. "It's about losing your way and finding it again, about the power of truth to set us free, and about how sometimes the most profound wisdom comes from the innocence of a child." As they began to play, Elena felt the years of pain and struggle falling away. The melody she'd written in anger had been transformed through collaboration with Benjamin, their styles merging to create something neither could have achieved alone. And weaving through it all was Daniel's simple, pure guitar line, binding their complicated adult emotions with the straightforward beauty of a child's love for music. The song built to its climax, and Elena saw tears in the eyes of many audience members. This wasn't just music, it was truth set to melody, redemption given voice, the power of choosing healing over hatred. As the final notes faded, the room erupted in applause. Journalists were on their feet, cameras flashing, but Elena barely noticed them. She was watching Daniel, who was looking between her and his father with pure joy, understanding that he had been the bridge that made this miracle possible. Later that night, after the cameras had gone and the guests had left, Elena found herself back in the music room. The moon was casting shadows through the tall windows, the same moonlight that had inspired her first hit songs so many years ago. "Elena?" Daniel's voice came from the doorway. "Are you leaving?" She turned to see both Daniel and Benjamin standing there, 2 generations of Whitmores, both part of her story now in very different ways. "Not leaving," she said softly. "Just thinking about what comes next." "Stay," Daniel said simply. "We have so much more music to make." Benjamin stepped forward, his expression open and vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. "He's right. This house has been filled with stolen melodies for too long. It's time to fill it with new songs, honest ones." Elena looked around the room that had once represented everything she'd lost, and saw instead everything she'd gained. Not just her career and reputation restored, but something more precious: the ability to transform pain into beauty, to choose creation over destruction. "Well," she said, picking up her guitar, "I do have this new melody I've been working on." Daniel rushed to get his guitar, and Benjamin smiled, not his old showman's smile, but something real and warm. Outside, the city hummed its eternal urban symphony, but in here, three people who had been brought together by a broken melody were creating something whole, something true, something that would last. The forgotten melody had been remembered, and in its remembering, had given birth to 1,000 new songs waiting to be sung.